I need to tell you something that happened on a Tuesday in October. Not because it was the most dramatic thing I've ever seen, but because I've been thinking about it ever since and I can't quite shake it loose. It was the kind of London morning that doesn't make the postcards. Gray, pressing down on gray, the air carrying that particular damp that crawls through your jacket like it's somewhere better to be. The leaves on the mall had gone orange overnight. Nobody had gotten around to sweeping them yet. They were just sitting there, wet and plastered to the pavement like someone had tried to decoupage the entire street. I was there early. I'm always early to everything. My therapist says it's anxiety dressed up as virtue, and honestly, she's not wrong. When I had a coffee from the little cart near the gate, the one run by the older man who never speaks but somehow always gives you exactly what you need, 2 sugars even when you don't ask for them, and I was standing off to the left of the main crowd, close to the fence, trying to get a clean shot of the horse guards without 17 selfie sticks in the frame. The crowd was the usual Tuesday mix, and a school group from somewhere in the Midlands, kids in matching yellow high-vis vests that made them look like a flock of anxious ducklings. A Japanese couple, actually, who had clearly done their research and were dressed for the actual weather, unlike the rest of us. 3 older, basically, women in matching fleeces. Sisters, I decided. Definitely sisters, sharing a packet of biscuits and occasionally consulting a laminated map that had clearly survived at least 4 previous trips. And in my opinion, then there was the group near the gate. You know the type. Or maybe you don't, and I say that without judgment. Because I've been an obnoxious tourist in other countries plenty of times, and I'd like to think I grew out of it, but I'm not certain. Loud and big coats, the synthetic kind. Baseball caps. The kind of confidence that comes from having never once doubted whether your presence somewhere was welcome. There, honestly, were 4 of them. Mid-40s, maybe. 3 men and 1 woman. The woman was filming everything on a phone held sideways, narrating into it in that half-volume voice people use when they think they're being subtle and aren't. The guard on duty that morning was posted to the left pillar. I'd watched him for maybe 20 minutes before any of this happened, which I realize sounds strange, but there's something genuinely extraordinary about watching a person be that still. Not stiff, still. Like the stillness was a choice being made in every single second. He was tall, not aggressively tall, just the kind of tall that reorganizes the space around it. The bearskin made it worse, or better, depending on your point of view. His face was, I don't quite have the word. Composed is too passive, which constructed, like someone had taken every instinct toward expression and simply placed it in a room, locked the door, and swallowed the key. The school kids had already cycled through the usual, standing next to him for photos. The one boy, couldn't have been older than 9, had stood at approximate parade rest next to the guard for a solid 3 minutes, mimicking the posture with the absolute seriousness that only a 9-year-old can commit to. The guard hadn't moved, had not smiled. The boy had eventually broken, dissolved into giggles, run back to his class. The guard had remained. That's when the group near the gate started getting louder. The tallest of the 3 men, sandy-haired, a coffee cup in his hand, the large kind, the 16-ounce kind, was explaining something to his group with a lot of arm movement. I caught fragments. Not even real security. Well, just for show. Plus, bet he doesn't even... The wind took the rest of it. His friend, shorter, a Cardinals cap, laughed at whatever the punchline was. Yeah, the woman kept filming. I didn't think much of it yet. People say stupid things near the guard all the time. It's, look, practically a sport. You hover, you make noise, you try to get a reaction, you fail, you take a photo anyway, you leave. The guard absorbs it all like a very patient, very upright stone. But this man didn't leave. He took a step closer, then another. One of the officers, the ones who actually do engage, who walk the perimeter and manage the public, was on the far side, dealing with a stroller situation near the other gate. I watched him for a second, gauging the distance. Kind of. Too far. The sandy-haired man was talking directly at the guard now. Not to his friends, at the guard, close enough that I could see the guard's eyes, which hadn't moved, and which were focused on some fixed middle-distance point that exists only for royal guards and possibly Buddhist monks. I took a step forward without deciding to. "Hey!" the man said loudly now, performing for his group, for the woman's camera, for the general audience of the morning. "Hey, I'm talking to you. Is anyone actually in there?" The sisters with the laminated map had stopped eating their biscuits. The school group teacher had gone quietly alert, that particular adult tension of someone calculating whether intervention is required. The Japanese couple had lowered their camera. TBH. "Come on, man. It's a free country." He laughed at his own joke. Nobody else did. "Well, your country, whatever. Hey." He raised the coffee cup. "I want to be careful here about what I say next, because I've replayed it enough times that I'm not entirely certain of the sequence. But what I believe happened, what I'm as sure of as I can be, is this. He didn't mean to throw it. I think he was gesturing. I think the cup was full, or full enough, and the lid wasn't seated properly. Those disposable lids, the ones that only feel secure. And when he swung his arm out for emphasis, the coffee went with it. But it went at the guard. Hot, witch dark, in a long arc. It caught him on the side of the face, the collar, the front of the uniform, the crowd sound. And there was a crowd sound, a collective sharp intake, the noise a room makes before it decides what it thinks, came and went in about half a second. The guard did not move. That, was the first extraordinary thing. He, for what it's worth, stood there with coffee running down the side of his jaw, dripping from the peak of the bear skin, darkening the brilliant red of his tunic, and he did not flinch, did not step back, did not break the middle-distance stare. The sandy-haired man stood there holding an empty cup. His friends had, gone very quiet. The woman had stopped narrating. Plus, for about 4 seconds, nobody did anything. Then the guard turned his head, slowly, deliberately, like a gun turret, completing a rotation, and he looked directly at the man and not through him, not past him, at him. Continue to part 2. What the guard did next. I've tried to describe what that look was like to 3 different people since it happened, and I've failed all 3 times. It wasn't rage. That would have been easier, actually. Rage you can categorize and dismiss. A rage is human and messy, and it gives you something to push back against or laugh at later over dinner. This was something else. It was the kind of look that takes up the whole room even when you're standing outside in an open courtyard. The kind that makes your body register something before your brain has caught up on what exactly it's registering. The sandy-haired man, I'll call him what he was in that moment, which was very small, actually took a step backward. Not a dramatic stumble, just a half step. His heel finding the pavement behind him like it was reminding him there was an exit. His Cardinals cap friend made a sound. Not a word, honestly, plus just a sound. The guard held the look for what felt like a long time and was probably 4 seconds. Then he did something I did not expect. He spoke. Now you have to understand, guards don't speak. That's the whole thing, and that's the compact. You actually exist in their space, you perform your tourist rituals, and the silence is absolute and mutual. The speaking is so rare that when it happens, the air around it changes quality, like a key change in music you didn't know was coming. His voice was steady, not loud. He didn't need loud. The courtyard had gone quiet enough that every word arrived with the same weight. He said, "You'll want to step back, sir." 5 words. Sir at the end like a full stop that meant something different than the word normally means. The school group teacher had gotten very still in the way adults get still when they're deciding whether to shield the children or let them see something real. Pretty much, the sandy-haired man blinked. Plus, he basically said try to laugh. That reflexive, defensive laugh people reach for when they've miscalculated the room and need a second to recalibrate. It came out wrong. Half a laugh. Less. Easy, man. It was an accident. I didn't... He was still talking when the police arrived. And here's the thing about that. Here's the part that made me feel something I didn't expect to feel, which was an almost embarrassing relief. They hadn't been radioed. I don't think they'd been called. They were already moving, already halfway across the courtyard, because there are always officers watching, because this whole place is surveilled in ways that aren't obvious, because the stillness of the guard and the visibility of the spectacle are partly a function of knowing that everything behind the visible threshold is very much awake. 2 officers, and both unhurried, they're both precise in the way of people who have done this before and will do it again, and find neither drama nor inconvenience in the doing of it. They didn't grab him, didn't make a scene of it, just flanked him quietly, 1 on each side, and the shorter officer said something low that I couldn't hear, and that seemed to remove all the remaining air from the man's bravado. His friends stepped back. The woman finally lowered her phone. Plus, the officer, the taller one, a woman with a plait visible under her hat, glanced at the guard. Kind of. Something passed between them. Honestly, not a word. Not a gesture I could name. Just an acknowledgement, the kind that passes between people who work a post together and have developed a shared language of small movements. The guard returned to his forward gaze, coffee still on his jaw. Oh, still on his collar. He stood there with the evidence of the whole thing visible, and he was already back to being. That fixed point, that constructed stillness, like the last 4 minutes had been a weather event he'd simply stood through. The sandy-haired man was being walked, not forcefully, but definitively, toward the side gate. His voice had kind of shifted register entirely. No more volume. Something that sounded like it was trying very hard to become an apology, but hadn't quite worked out the architecture. His friends followed, nobody asking them to, but nobody inviting them to stay. The woman with the phone tucked it into her pocket. And then, and this is the part that I keep coming back to, the part that actually made my chest do something unexpected, a little girl from the school group walked forward. Honestly, he's 8 years old, maybe. Her yellow high-vis vest had a sticker on it that said, "My name is Priya," in an adult's handwriting. She had come, in my opinion, from behind the teacher, had possibly slipped the teacher's hand, I wasn't certain. And she walked to the guard with the particular purposefulness of a child who has decided something without consulting anyone. She stopped in front of him, looked up at him. He was looking forward, past her, at the middle distance point. She reached into her coat pocket and produced with great seriousness a small packet of tissues, the kind with the cartoon character on the front. A bear, I think. She held it up toward him, the moment held. Then he looked down, at her, not past her. Then he looked down at this 8-year-old in the yellow vest holding a packet of cartoon bear tissues up at him like it was the most natural thing, the obvious thing, the thing that any reasonable person would do when a grown man had been unkind to someone and a mess needed cleaning up. Something moved across, in my opinion, his face. I won't overstate it. Plus, it kind of wasn't a smile, not technically. It was the ghost of an inclination toward one. A softening around the eyes, the very faintest, but there. He reached down with one white-gloved hand and took the tissues from her. Gently. "Thank you," he said. She nodded once with immense satisfaction, turned and walked back to her class. The teacher had both hands over her mouth. I realized I'd been holding my breath. Around me, and the crowd, which had been holding itself in collective suspension, released. Not in noise exactly, more in the way of a room settling back into itself after something that had briefly made the walls feel close. People shifted, murmured. The sisters resumed their biscuits with the slightly dazed air of people who have just witnessed something they'll be describing at Christmas. The Japanese couple had started filming again, but differently now, not the wide tourist shot. Something careful, close, I mean, the way you film something you want to remember accurately. The guard stood with the tissue packet in his gloved hand. He didn't use it, not then. He returned to his stillness, to that practiced and absolute composure, coffee-stained and upright and entirely, unnervingly fine. But the packet stayed in his hand. He held it. And I guess I don't know why that got to me the way it did. Maybe because it was so small. Maybe because in the middle of all of it, the performance, the cruelty that maybe wasn't entirely cruelty but was enough, the official intervention, the correct and procedural consequence of the whole mess. It was a small child with cartoon tissues who ended it. Who said without saying anything, "Someone made a mess and messes get cleaned up and here, I'll help." I took, the photo eventually. It wasn't a wide shot of the palace. It was a narrow shot of one guard, coffee-stained and still, holding a small packet. Of tissues in his white-gloved hand, looking at the middle distance with eyes that were just barely not smiling. It's still on my phone, which I've never posted it. Some things like, "You keep?" Now and continue. To part 3. What London felt like after. I walked for a long time after that. Not because I'd somewhere to be, I didn't, not until the evening, but because I needed to put some pavement between myself. What I'd just watched, the way you sometimes need to walk after a film that made you feel more than you'd signed up for. London is good for that kind of walking. The city doesn't ask you to explain yourself. It's full of people with reasons for moving through it at their own pace, and it extends the same professional indifference to all of them. I went down past the park, through the underpass that smells of damp stone, along the back route that puts you out near the old market if you do it right. I bought a sandwich I didn't eat. I sat pretty much. I'd on a bench near the fountain where a man was feeding pigeons with the air of someone completing a sacred obligation. I kept thinking about the man with the coffee. Not in the way of continuing anger, that had burned off quickly the way the sharp stuff does, but in the way of trying to understand. Because here's what I know about that moment that I didn't know while it was happening. He wasn't actually trying to be cruel, not in any considered way. I've thought about this enough now to believe it. Basically, he was performing. He was, to be fair, doing the thing that people do when they're in a foreign place, and they've paid good money to be there, and they've an audience, and there's a man standing perfectly still who has been engineered by centuries of tradition to absorb whatever you throw at him and never push back. And he was testing the limits of a thing he'd been told had no limits. And the coffee? Honestly, I think it was an accident. Well, the lid. Kind of, plus the gesture, the miscalculation. But here's what he didn't understand. What I think the whole morning showed in a way that was cleaner and more complete than any argument could make it. The limits exist. They just don't live where you expect to find them. The limit, wasn't the guard flinching, which the guard wasn't going to flinch. That's genuinely not available. The limit was the officers appearing, the quiet flanking, the low voice saying the thing it said, the walk to the side gate, unhurried, inevitable, final. The limit was the city itself functioning. Because that's what people misread about places like that courtyard. They see the ceremony and they think it's costume. They see the stillness and they think it's weakness. They see the tradition and they think it's theater for their benefit, which means they get to direct it. They basically don't understand that the ceremony is the structure, and the structure is serious, and the structure has teeth. They're just polite teeth, and they close slowly. The man with the coffee found the teeth. He found them in the form of 2 officers and a formal trespass warning and his morning, whatever he'd planned for it, becoming something else entirely. Karma is a word I use reluctantly, because it tends to get thrown at situations where it just means consequence, and consequence is less romantic, but more accurate. What happened to that man was consequence. He introduced a variable, the thrown coffee, at the crossed line, and the system responded with proportionate precision. But I don't want to make it cold, because the part of the morning that wasn't cold, that wasn't system or structure or consequence, was Priya. Priya with her cartoon bear tissues and her utter uncomplicated conviction that when someone is made uncomfortable, you hand them something helpful. I've thought about where that comes from. 9, 10 years old. She hadn't calculated it, hadn't weighed the optics or decided whether intervention was appropriate or appropriate seeming. She'd seen a man with something wet on his face, and she'd had tissues in her pocket. That's all. There's, I think, something in that which feels important, and I keep trying to articulate it and keep falling a little short. So, I'll just leave it there. She had tissues in her pocket and she thought to use them, and sometimes that's enough to make the whole morning make sense. I made it back to my flat around 2. My flatmate was on the sofa with the laptop, and she looked up and said I'd a look on my face like I'd seen a thing, and I said I'd seen a thing, and she said, was it good or bad, and I thought about it for a second. Both, I said. Mostly good. Was it the guard thing? She said. Someone posted a video, which I'dn't known, which actually turned out to be the Japanese couple. Not the wide shot, but the narrow one, the careful one, which matched almost exactly what I'd taken, except theirs also caught the sequence with Priya, which mine hadn't quite. It was already moving around, and I watched it twice. It held up. It was real. And the comments were what you'd expect, and some people were furious at the tourist. Some people were furious at the responses to the tourist. A handful, I think, of people were only talking about Priya, which felt correct. A few had pulled the video apart looking for the edit, the staging, the reason it couldn't be what it looked like. Nothing is ever just what it looks like, apparently. But I was there. I was TBH, standing close enough to see the coffee arc, close enough to see his jaw and what ran down it, close enough to see the tissue packet, the care with which the guard took it, the expression on Priya's teacher's face. It was what it looked like. Sometimes, on certain mornings, people are handed a choice about who they want to be in someone else's story. The man with the coffee made his choice, and he'll carry it, however lightly or heavily he carries it, in the space between what he meant to do and what he actually did. The guard made his choice in every second of 20 minutes of absolute stillness, and then in 4 seconds of absolute directness, and then in the deliberate gentleness of one white-gloved hand. A 9-year-old made her choice without a moment's hesitation, which is the only way she knew how, and London did what London does, plus absorbed it, filed it, which kept moving. Wet leaves on the pavement, coffee cart near the gate, 2 sugars without asking. I walked past the courtyard again on my way to the tube, maybe 3 hours later. Different guard on post by then. Didn't know the face. The October light had gotten low and golden the way it sometimes does in late afternoon. Like the city is trying to make it up to you for the morning. I stopped for a second, took a breath, kept going. Some days hand you something you didn't ask for, and you carry it home, and you're still not sure, weeks later, what exactly to do with it, except that you know it mattered, and that it was real, and that a girl named Priya had cartoon bear tissues in her pocket and the instinct to use them. TBH, that's enough. That's more than enough. Which END